is the DAWbench Radio Show, the official podcast of DAWbench.com.
Welcome to the DAWbench Radio Show. I'm your host, Curigliano of AAVIM Technology in Melbourne, Australia, and I am joined again by Pete Brown of Microsoft in Maryland in the United States. How you going today, Pete?
I'm doing really well. It's cold here in Maryland this week, but I'm making through it. So,
and you do realise I'm at the opposite end of the world, the arse end of the world, and we're kind of 35, 40 degree type of temperatures at the moment.
Yeah, it's been below freezing here forever, but yeah, I'm looking forward to getting out of here and going to NAMM next week, where it's like 60, 70 degrees. It'll be nice.
Yeah, Anaheim will be a lot nicer than where you are at the moment. Yeah. Yep. All right. Now, today we have a very special guest, and that is Michelle Moog-Koussa, who is the founder and executive director of the Bob Moog Foundation, which she established in 2006 to honour the legacy of her father, Bob Moog, who is the legendary and revolutionary music tech pioneer that invented the first commercial analog synthesizer. Welcome, Michelle.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
You're most welcome, Michelle. Now, with tradition, I always like to start the show saying, well, where exactly did, my experience with the music and the technology intersect with the guests? And with, you're a little bit different in the sense that you founded the foundation to honour the legacy of your father's work, right? So let me just say that, I've been aware of the foundation for probably the last 10 years, probably more so. And I've become way more familiar with it over the last couple of years. And but we can cover that in greater detail a little bit further on. But we do have to give an overview of your father's work and his legacy, because it is just so important within the music technology field. So your dad, he's probably better known for the synthesizers, but he started off his career building Theremins. Now, I actually printed out a timeline, and it went for 2 pages, but we can't we can't cover the timeline in every detail. But your dad started building Theremins in 1953.
Wow.
And he was doing that. So he would have been, in your teenage years, Michelle, am I right?
Well, he actually started selling Theremins when he was in 1953, right? 1953, 1954, when he was 19 years old.
Right.
He started making Theremins when he was 14 years old.
Oh, wow.
Okay, there you go. Right. So the timeline I've got is 1953. So that's when he would have started selling them. And he was selling, and he was working with his dad at the time. And I think your grandfather was building the actual the bodies of the Theremins. Am I correct? Is that the collaboration those two had?
Yes, he was constructing the cabinetry.
Yeah.
Grandpa George was an amateur woodworker, very, very proficient amateur woodworker, and so he did all the woodwork. But he was also an electrical engineer for Con Edison, which is the electric company in New York City.
Right.
So he did. He is the one who taught young Bob about circuitry and electronics. And by the time that Bob was 19, he was a master of the circuitry.
Right.
So he was doing most of the circuitry. Grandpa George would help some. They designed some of the interfaces for the Theremins together, and then Grandpa George did the cabinetry.
Right. What an awesome collaboration that was. So, and look, again, I always thought I had a pretty reasonable understanding of the history of Moog, but since diving in, the last couple of months preparing for this show, I've been astounded by just how far back it went and how little I knew, Michelle. I mean, amazing. So So with the Theremins, 53, 54, and then the other one real quickly, and I'm going to mention, in 1955, there was a musician called Raymond Scott who modified one of the Theremins into an instrument called a clavivox. Now, I had never even heard of that. Have you heard of that, Pete?
No, I haven't actually.
Well, it was essentially a theremin with a keyboard controller.
Oh, well, that's odd.
So he modified one of the original Theremins with a keyboard controller. Do you know if any of those still exist, Michelle? Are they any of those clavivox units still around?
I am not aware that they are, and I am also not aware exactly how many there were, but I don't think it was more than a handful.
Yeah, I don't think he would have built many of them, because I think the fellow actually built it for himself. But that would have been an interesting thing. But I couldn't find any other reference to it. So I would say there would only have been a handful, and they've unfortunately probably been lost, you know.
Well, Raymond Scott was quite a maverick inventor and band leader himself.
Right.
So I would encourage your listeners to do some research just on him, but he also went on to develop several other fascinating instruments, none of which were popularized, but fascinating nonetheless.
Yeah.
And he was one of Bob and George Moog's first customers.
Yes. Yeah. Amazing. We'll just try and quickly go through the timeline. So around 1963, your dad met a musician called Herb Deutsch. Is that the pronunciation? Deutsch. That's the pronunciation. And with that collaboration, they started working on these electronic voltage control modules, which eventually became the Moog synthesizer, or what I traditionally call the Moog Modular. So, you know, they
MVin.
Moog Modular. Yep.
There we go. And we're going to beat that Aussie out of you.
Yeah, I think just every time he says Moog, he has to put a $10 donation in a jar for the Bob Moog Foundation.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I want you to win me the next raffle, Vin. That's it. That's how we're going to do this.
Michelle, I might be broke by the end of the show. I mean, you're trying to beat out literally 50 years of me pronouncing it incorrectly, because I always pronounce it the way I read the name. You know, it's just and we had this discussion in the pre-chat, Pete, real quickly, where I actually quickly asked Michelle, I'm going, am I on an island here? And she says no. And I mean, you can actually tell that story a bit later, Michelle, because it was actually quite entertaining. Sorry, Pete, you were about to say something?
I was going to say, we'll just counsel folks to start referring to you as Curigliano, right? So there we go.
Listen, if they can say Curigliano,
because that's how it's spelled.
Yes, and if they can say Curigliano, I'll actually give them a tick, because some of the absolute butchery of my surname and pronunciation over the years has got nowhere near what it's actually phonetically spelled as.
Fair enough.
There you go.
So I think maybe we just need to beg a little forgiveness here. Michelle will try to beat you down as much as possible, but listeners, sure, feel free to comment and let us know how many times Vin mispronounced.
All right, you
here.
can keep belting me. I'm prepared for it.
Yep.
Okay, so real quickly, the collaboration ended up with those modules, and it took a couple of years, didn't it, Michelle, before those modules became into something that was commercially produced as the synthesizer. I think it was called the synthesizer around 1967. So they were working on those modules for what, 3, 4 years or so before they started presenting them commercially. Am I kind of close to the mark there?
There's some accuracy to that. It's a little bit more nuanced at the beginning. Bob and Herb met at a New York State Music Educators Conference,
right?
In the winter of 1963.
Yep.
And Herb was a young professor at Hofstra University on Long Island in New York.
Right.
But he was also an experimental jazz composer.
Yes. Who
was having a very hard time making the sounds he wanted to from splicing tape.
Mm-hmm.
So what happened is Herb came to the booth where Bob Moog was repping his Theremins, and also there were also tubas in the booth because his business partner Walter Sear repped a high-end line of tubas from Belgium.
Right.
And maybe not surprising to anyone listening, the booth was empty when Herb approached. And with only Bob standing there, and he walked up and said, "Hi, I'm looking for Bob Moog." And, Dad said, "Well, that's me." And he said, "Well, listen, I have one of your Melodia Theremins," which was Bob's first transistorized theremin. I have one of those in my classroom. I use it for ear training.
Yep.
But I'm also an experimental jazz composer, and there are all these sounds I want to make, and the technology just isn't there. Do you think you could help me by building something with which I can make these sounds?" And Bob, without knowing how to go about this, said yes, because he was always curious and loved one-off difficult projects where he had to think his way through them. And so then they got together in later that winter in New York. And then in the summer of 1964, Hofstra gave Herb a grant of $200 to go spend 3 weeks with Bob in Trumansburg, New York. And there they worked together with Herb defining what he needed as a musician, Bob listening and translating that into a circuit board.
Right.
Or into a circuit, rather. And by the end of those 3 weeks, they had the breadboard prototypes of some early functionality of what will become the Moog Modular Synthesizer.
Right.
Oh, wow.
What happened is shortly after their work together, a few months later, Bob received a surprise invitation to the Audio Engineering Society show in New York City because some people had found out what he and Herb had been working on. He went to the Audio Engineering Society convention, and I don't think he was expecting too much, especially because at least either one or two people report that when they walked up to his bridge table covered in a batik tablecloth with modules on it, that he was asleep. And I get that because I know from watching my father work, that probably means he was up until 2:00 in the morning trying to finish everything off.
Yep.
Right.
But in any case, people were very interested in these few voltage controlled modules that he was presenting, and they started placing orders. He got his first order from Elwin Nikolai, who was an experimental choreographer, and he had his next order from Eric Sadeh. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because he went back home and then proceeded to build systems that Eric Sadeh and Elwin Nikolai had specified, because they were paying what Dad would call real money for them.
Yep.
And that is something his company desperately needed at the time. So actually what happened is he did develop quite a nice prototype for Herb, but that wasn't delivered to Herb until 1965.
Right.
Because Elwin and Eric received their modulars first. So it was around, late 64 into 65 before the first systems started going out. These instruments, as you can imagine, were slow to catch on, as you've kind of noted.
Yep.
It did take much of 65, 66. They were sold mostly to experimental composers, a lot of academic composers. The systems were quite expensive, difficult to use, certainly not what one would call portable. In today's terms, anyhow.
Well, with a road crew, maybe.
Right. And then up until that point, they weren't even referred to as synthesizers. They were referred to as portable electronic music composition systems.
Right.
That just rolls off the tongue.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And then by 1967 was the first time that R.A. Moog Co., which was the name of the company that had actually begun in 1954 with the Theremins. It was the first time that R.A. Moog Co. put the term synthesizer on what they were developing.
Right.
And by that time, there were 3 different systems
Yep.
that you could purchase.
Yeah. And you've got people like the Beach Boys, and I think even the Beatles used one as well on one of the albums. And there's some other artists that I've slipped the top of my mind, but I do remember the Beach Boys, definitely the Beach Boys and the Beatles in that timeline.
The Beatles used a Moog synthesizer. I don't think the Beach Boys actually used a Moog synthesizer. They did use something that was very theremin-like in the vibrations.
Okay.
Right.
Right.
And it's actually called a Melsonar. Well, on tour, they used something called a Melsonar. In the studio, they used something called a, oh gosh, now that's terrible. I'm going to blank on it. It was like another version of a theremin.
Yeah, yeah. Well, good vibrations. That whole kind of there's a very definite, distinct kind of line in that sounds very theremin-like. So I'd say that's what the instrument was. But I think the thing that really brought it to everyone's attention back then was Switched on Bark, that Wendy Carlos released. So that was 1968.
Yeah, so up until that time, it was in 1967 when pop groups started using the Moog synthesizer.
Right, okay.
And do you know the history behind that?
No.
So Bob hired Bernie Krause and Paul Beaver on the West Coast to be his West Coast representatives for Moog synthesizers.
Mm-hmm.
They were having a really hard time convincing people purchase them because of the reasons that I had mentioned before. They're hard to use, they're expensive, they're hard to carry around. And so at that time, Bernie and Paul had worked with Jack Hotop at None Such Records, and they asked him for some advice. They were lamenting they weren't selling any of these instruments. And he said, the Monterey Pop Festival is in June. Why don't you go there and set up a booth and show the Moog synthesizer to, all the music fans and all the musicians there? And they did that. And it was immediately after that the Doors, the Byrds, the Monkees.
There you go.
Yes. So those were the earliest usages of the Moog synthesizer. The Moog synthesizer actually showed up in that music in 1967.
Right.
And then, as you say, it was really Wendy Carlos's work with Switched on Bark that was the groundbreaking record that brought the Moog synthesizer into the popular consciousness and showed that the Moog synthesizer could be used for something more than more or less sound effects.
Yep.
And more as a musical instrument.
Yeah, and the expression. Yeah, just the expression of the modulation and the pitch bend and all of that, which was unheard of for anything outside of an acoustic instrument to that point. Well, except for the theremin, but the theremin was,
it's all pitch bend at that point.
Yeah, that is all. Yeah, amazing instrument. Just real quickly, we're moving the MiniMoog in 1970. We'll call that the paradigm shift, Michelle, because it literally was a paradigm shift where your dad put all of that technology from the modular Moog system into something that you could put under one arm, literally, and get on the stage and actually just start wailing away on it. And, Pete, you've got an original D, don't you?
I have a reissue. I don't have an original. I would love an original.
You've got a Voyager. Is that what you've got?
I do. Yeah, I've got a Voyager, and actually, I have two Voyagers. They're really fantastic instruments, but I don't have an original. Yeah. But I do enter the Moog Foundation, the Bob Moog Foundation raffle every year, hoping to win an original, but that hasn't happened yet.
Yeah.
Don't give up.
No, I won't. I'll keep at it.
I kept eyeing off that raffle. I'm going, what would be the chances of some little black duck in Melbourne actually winning it? But I think the next one that pops up, especially if it's who was the last one signed by? Was that
Peter Gabriel?
Yeah, it was Peter Gabriel. Which understand, Vin, I am a massive Peter Gabriel fan, so I did dump some cash into that last raffle there. So.
I do remember.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.
There was one with Jordan Peterson. Not Jordan Peterson.
Jordan Rudess?
Jordan Rudess. Yeah, there was one with there was one with Jordan Rudess as well that I should have kind of hopped on, but the next one, Michelle, promise.
Okay. And just so you know, we have had one winner in Australia. And we've had many international winners, many, including the Peter Gabriel MiniMoog went to someone who lives in Berlin.
Yeah, fantastic.
Well, there you go.
And who has a little boy who's like 6, who's also a huge Peter Gabriel fan.
Oh, that's amazing.
Right? So that'll be passed down as a family heirloom, I think.
Awesome. Look, if you can wrangle Rick Wakeman to signing one, let me tell you, I'll be throwing money at it like hand over fist.
Well, he has already signed one for us many years ago. That's
Right.
not to say we wouldn't do another one. I adore Rick. Yeah.
Amazing human being. I met him briefly when he was in Australia, and I somehow landed being his keyboard tech by accident, which is not a story which I'll share here. But we had a great time while he was in Melbourne, and I got him to sign a few things, and he's just an amazing human being, very, very talented, but he could be a stand-up comedian, Michelle. That guy, some of the stories that he actually tells, it's just amazing.
He is in England. He's well known. He is better known for being a comedian in England than he is for being a musician.
Oh, how does that work?
Oh, wow. I had no idea.
Really?
Yes.
Well, if you want to kind of hear some of the comedic kind of levels of stuff that he comes up with off the cuff, go watch his inauguration into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame when Yes got.
Yep.
I was in hysterics. I'm going, yeah, that's Rick.
Yep.
Oh boy. See, we got sidetracked. So look, with MiniMoog, now that was a huge success, Michelle. Right? Yeah, I mean, it's unprecedented, huge success. I would have thought, right? So I was really surprised while I'm going through the history that your dad sold the company in 1971. So 1 year after the MiniMoog was released, your dad sold the company. I'm thinking, wow, what happened there? Without going into, a 3-hour conversation.
Well, yeah, there's a very good explanation, and this is the reason that I asked Albert Glinsky, who wrote Leon Theremins' biography, to write Dad's biography, because there is so much complexity and nuance behind every single stage of the Moog legacy, and that book, Bob Moog. Switched on Bob Moog and the Synthesizer Revolution is 400 pages long.
Right.
That delves into these nuances. But I just want to backtrack a tiny bit by saying, when you introduced the MiniMoog, you said, Bob had put everything in the modular into the MiniMoog. I'd like to clarify that just a little bit by saying the MiniMoog cannot do everything that a modular can do.
Oh, no, of course. Right, of course.
Right. But as you pointed out, it is much smaller. You can carry it under your arm. And it did take many of the fundamental principles found in a modular. But to give credit where credit is due, the birth of the MiniMoog really happened when one of Bob's engineers, Bill Hemsath, noticed that every time he was demonstrating a modular synthesizer for somebody, he was doing the same thing. He was connecting things the same way and using about, a half a dozen different modules. And so he decided he was going to build a demonstration unit. And so on his lunch breaks, he would go up to what they called the graveyard, which is where we went through extra circuit boards and extra modules and such. And he pieced together a demonstration unit, which he then called the Min-A.
Right.
And everyone thought it was kind of cool. Like, they referred to it as Hemsath's toy. But then he used it and got enough interest that he and a couple engineers built something a little bit more developed. It was actually hardwired. The Min-A was just, I believe it was 6 modules in a cabinet. But by the Min-B, the circuitry was hardwired. The patches were hardwired.
Right.
And that's a point where Bob kind of got drawn into the discussion, because what was happening during that time is the company was losing money hand over fist.
Right.
Because what happened is in 1968, when Wendy Carlos came out with Switched on Bach, everyone thought, I'm going to get one of those Moog synthesizers and I'm going to sound like Wendy Carlos, which is kind of like me looking at a bathing suit on a supermodel and thinking, I'm going to get that bathing suit to look just like that on me. And what happened is when people got their Moog synthesizers, they found that they were hard to use. and a lot of people got discouraged. And the company did have a burst in sales in 1969, and then it completely dropped off. At that point, Bob had 42 people working for him, and the sales just kind of completely stopped.
They cratered, yeah.
So the engineers sensed that they better come up with something different, otherwise everyone was going to be out of work. And by the time Bob came into the discussion, right around when the Min B was being developed, he initially did not like the idea because he had spent these many years trying to provide the musician with as much sonic capability as possible.
Right.
You know, a large Moog modular could produce over 250,000 sounds. That was his whole goal, to widen the palette for musicians as much as possible. So the idea of the MiniMoog went completely against his ethos, but he eventually began to see the worth of it. And by the Model C is when he jumped in and he designed the user interface.
Right.
So that iconic user interface that you see, that is one of his biggest contributions to the MiniMoog, in addition to the fact that the MiniMoog is all based on the modulars and the modules that he developed.
Yeah.
Right.
So what happened, though, is it took a while to get the MiniMoog into production. They produced 200 of them. They thought that's all they'd sell. Believe it or not, it was also hard to get the MiniMoog to catch on, because if you're thinking, okay, these will be great for gigging musicians, well, gigging musicians had very little idea of how to work these things.
Yep.
So it took a while before the sales kind of ramped up. And during that time, RA Moog Co. got deeper and deeper and deeper into debt. So, and the 200 MiniMoogs that were sold were not enough to save it. When Bob sold the company in 1971, he was $250,000 in debt.
Yeah.
In today's money, that's $1.7 million.
Yeah.
And, you know, when I think about these kind of things, I then kind of interface them with my family life. And my mother had just had my little brother. So Dad had 4 kids at that time, ranging from 9 to newborn. And he's $1.7 million in debt and has no idea what to do.
Yeah.
He did spend quite a bit of time. Well, part of the reason that he came in a little late with the MiniMoog is because he was out trying to sell the company.
Yeah.
And he finally found a venture capitalist who purchased the company from him for the debt only.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
And then said to him, I will purchase the company. I'll pay off the debt. But you're no longer president because you don't know how to run a company. So, and then that person moved the company from idyllic Trumansburg, New York, just outside of Ithaca, which is in upstate New York, over to Buffalo, New York, where a more formal factory was set up, and eventually over 12,000 MiniMoogs were made.
Right. Okay. So, it's safe to say that the MiniMoog is the best of kind of let's say probably the most used components in an analog synthesizer. So we start off oscillator, filter, LFO for modulation, and the envelope generators, which became very much a classic type of signal flow. And yeah, I was. Yeah, thinking back what I've said, where they've put everything from the modular in. No, they've done let's say a best of collection of the modules into something that is going to be usable and can produce those amazing sounds. So, yeah, interesting about the business side. But the thing is that it didn't kind of end there with the business sales as well, because it was sold again in 1973, Michelle, to. Is it Norland Musical Instruments?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So Bill Waitana, who was a venture capitalist, who purchased RA Moog Co. and pretty quickly turned it into Moog Music, essentially bought it to flip it.
Yep.
And that is what he did. And then Norland, which was a South American music conglomerate, who also owned Lowry and Sennheiser and Gibson and many others.
Yep.
They purchased Moog Music in 1973.
Yeah. But your dad stayed on until, let me have a look here, 77?
Actually, you mentioned Lowry, so sorry, real quick. Is that why the original Moog Taurus has pedals that are compatible with the Lowry organs from the time?
I don't know.
I wonder if that's why. Because I remember looking for replacement pedals, and they were the same as the Lowry ones from back then.
Oh, interesting. It wouldn't surprise me, but I don't know. That's a great question.
Yeah. Huh. Probably use the Lowry parts bin, Pete.
Well, that's what I was thinking, right? So
Yeah.
I had no idea the relationship between Lowry and Moog at the time. So
there you go.
They weren't located together. They were
Right,
just owned
right.
by the same company. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, but you can see that they were actually pooling some. We're going to build a floor pedal synthesizer. We need some pedals. Where are we going to get them? Oh, here's an idea.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
You can see it, can't you?
Yep.
Now the other thing, real quickly, so the Taurus pedals were 1975. But the other thing that was released in 1975 was a little thing called a Micro Moog, which
Moog.
Micro Moog.
Done it again.
Mm-hmm.
It's another $10. Micro Moog. I actually had one of those, and I'm sure a friend of mine has still got two of them, but I don't think they've been switched on for 20 years. So I'd be hesitant to actually hit the power switch on them. They could go up in smoke, you know. And the Micro Moog was just for people who are not familiar with it. It was like a one oscillator. It had the resonant filter, but it was only a one oscillator, a little beastie thing, and it didn't have a pitch wheel. It had a pitch ribbon, which was way ahead of its time if you think about it, right? So it had a mod wheel, but the pitch was on a ribbon, so you didn't have to go through. You could actually touch the ribbon at various points, and that's way ahead of its time. That little ribbon.
You know, the Moog modulars came with a ribbon controller.
Ah, did they? So that's where that was from. Yeah. Okay. Well, there you go.
Mm-hmm.
So, because I've never been in front of a Moog modular, unfortunately, Michelle. Pete, have you ever been in front of one?
At some shows and also at some other people's houses, but I don't have an official Moog modular myself.
Were you allowed to touch it?
I was, but not to play it really. But I think I was allowed to gently caress it, but not to actually change any settings or anything.
Yeah, you weren't allowed to patch it. Yeah,
No.
Amazing. So 1978, Michelle, your dad, I think his contract came up in 1977. And so in 1978, he's actually left that company and started Big Briar. Now, just as a bit of a background, I didn't think this was my timeline of your dad's legacy at Moog. Now, I knew that the company had gone bankrupt in the late 80s or early 90s, somewhere around there. I'd thought your dad had owned the company all the way through to the bankruptcy in the late 80s. I had no concept that he'd sold it multiple times, earlier on, and that he had no association with it after 1978, essentially.
Yeah, not only no association, but he wasn't allowed to use his name on any musical instrument.
Yeah, of course. So I thought Big Briar didn't come about, the company and the name didn't come about till, again, late 80s, early 90s, because that's when I was becoming aware of it more so. So he had nothing to do with the Polymoog, the Memory Moog, and that whole decline in the 80s. So that was an interesting and very fascinating thing for me to actually clarify while I've been doing my research here.
He was involved with the Polymoog just on the periphery.
Right.
Dave Luce was the main engineer on that project, but he was involved on the periphery. The Polymoog came out in 1975, so he was still around.
Oh, he was. Right, okay, sorry.
Although not really working on synthesizer projects. He was working on Maestro foot pedals and Gibson lab amps.
Right.
The way that he regarded it is he was essentially pushed off the engineering floor. And that's why he left.
Yeah, of course.
The way he puts it is, I didn't feel that the company made good use of my talents anymore. So he left.
100%.
Oh, bummer.
Yeah, 100%. So I didn't realize the Polymoog was that early. I thought the Polymoog was later, like, late 70s. So 75, that's interesting. Okay. Because the guys from Cherry Audio actually also stipulated, because I remember Pete when I'm saying, Polymoog, isn't that a preset? He goes, no, there was one, but there was, so there was obviously multiple models of it. And the one that stuck in my mind was the preset one. I didn't even realize it was a programmable one, So there you go. So Big Briar, 1978. That one blew me away, Michelle. I didn't realize it was that early with the Big Briar.
Yeah. So what happened is that, as you noted, Dad left Moog Music at the end of 77. But my mother, who is ever protective of her 4 children, said, well, we're not going to move right now.
Right.
Because it's January. We're going to wait until the school year is over. We always moved in June.
Right.
Because she always wanted us to at least be able to finish up the school year.
Mm-hmm.
Smart.
And my parents had purchased 2 pieces of land in North Carolina after visiting a colleague there and falling in love with the beauty of the area.
Yes.
So at that point, we moved down to North Carolina. And one of the pieces of land, it was 89 acres, was situated in Big Briar Cove.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah. Is that the house that's kind of like semi-round? I've seen a photo of like this awesome looking wood kind of cabin.
Yep.
Is that the house that you grew up in?
Yes, that's a house I grew up in.
Wow.
I remember it so fondly. It was a really amazing experience to grow up on that land.
Yep.
So yeah, we got down to that property in June of 1978. There was nothing there except for Dad's workshop had already been constructed by a construction company. He just had he built it. It was like a 2,000 square foot metal building with a cement floor.
Right.
And that was across the driveway from where the house would be. So when we moved in, that was the only thing on the property was that workshop building, which the moving trucks put all of our belongings in while the house was being built.
Right.
And we lived in a 100-year-old log cabin on the property while the house was being built.
Awesome. Awesome.
So, that is where Big Briar started. And it actually was incorporated. That company was incorporated in 1978.
Right.
I don't think he was very active with it until about 1980. He took about a year off from work to oversee the construction of the house and just to take a break.
Yep.
But then he jumped back into Big Briar and started his real passion at that time was building alternate controllers.
Yes. Yeah.
He felt that synthesis had come just about as far as it was going to, but that it was really missing human nuance in the interface.
Yep.
So he proceeded to come out with a line of alternate controllers, including a theremin controller, a multi-touch sensitive keyboard controller, small one, and a touch plate controller.
That's right, yeah.
Which I actually have a very funny story about if we have time.
Yeah, go.
Yeah.
So I can remember Dad working on these touch plates. And because, what would happen is Dad was quite a workaholic, I would say. And so he would work all day. He'd come in for dinner and then he'd take a nap and go back out to the shop until about 11 o'clock at night and work. And so if we wanted to say goodnight to him, we had to pad out to the shop across the driveway and knock on the door and hope we weren't interrupting him and give him a kiss goodnight. So I knew, sometimes the kinds of things he was working on just because I would see them on his bench. But I came home from school one day, I was probably 11 or 12. And, our driveway was a third of a mile long.
Oh.
The latter half was straight up a hill.
Right.
So, I come trudging up the driveway with my book bag and, it's 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. That's hot. And, I open the door to the house, just so relieved to finally relax. And it smells terrible, so acrid. And I said to my mother, she was sitting in the kitchen miraculously. I said, "What is that smell?" And she said, "Your father's baking touch plates in the oven."
Oh, what a classic.
Yeah. So anyhow, in the early years, that's what he was doing. He was focused on the alternate controllers. He was also doing a lot of consulting. He did consulting for Kumar and developed the Kumar Spirit.
That's right. Yeah.
Yes, which we are actually going to be showing at NAMM. We have 2 Kumar Spirits that we're going to be sharing and educating people about and allowing them to play them.
Oh, fantastic.
I was about to ask you if any of those units have survived. So there you go.
Yeah. Oh, yes. And he was also writing a column for Keyboard Magazine.
Mm-hmm.
And he was doing other consulting. And what that led to was by 1983, he was quite heavily involved with Kurzweil Music System.
That's right, yeah.
He was consulting for them, and they offered him a job. And as much as he loathed corporate life, he was intrigued with the work that Kurzweil was doing,
Mm-hmm.
and he had 4 children that needed to go through college.
Yeah.
And for those of your listeners who are in Europe and elsewhere where universities are actually affordable, that's not the case. That's not the case here in the United States.
Yeah.
So 4 kids going through college is, like having to buy 4 cars at once, or even more than that, much more than that. So he decided at that time to move to Kurzweil. We moved to work for Kurzweil, which was up in Massachusetts, over 1,000 miles away. And we left Big Briar Cove at that time. And his work with Big Briar more or less went on hold. He continued to work on one very important project every weekend that we were in Massachusetts. And that is the multi-touch sensitive keyboard that he was developing with John Eaton.
Right.
That he had been working on since 1970. That he worked on every weekend. But Big Briar otherwise was pretty much suspended for 5 years. And then my parents moved back to the exact same property, and Dad resumed his work with Big Briar. And at that point, he started making Theremins again. And that eventually led to the Moog that came out in 1998.
Yeah, the Moog Fogus.
Right, yeah.
So that may be one reason why when when you or someone like you thinks about Big Briar, you think about it much later, because the real activity in the early days, in the early 80s, was not well known. Then there was a 5-year hiatus, and then he jumped back in. So it's a little bit of a kind of disjointed history.
Yeah. So I've got a note here that Moog Music filed for bankruptcy in 1987. So that was for me. My perception was that's when your dad left the building, 1987, and I was flabbergasted, just staggered to go. Hang on, he was out of the building way before that.
He was long gone.
Yeah,
Michelle, do you recall where? Sorry, just personal question here. Since I grew up in Massachusetts, do you recall where in Massachusetts you all lived at the time?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I was 17 when we moved, so I have a good memory of it. We lived in South Natick.
Oh, okay, yep.
And the company Kurzweil was in Waltham.
Yep.
Yeah.
right.
Cool. Thanks. Yeah, down Route 9 there, probably.
Yep.
Cool.
Yeah, awesome. Just okay. So where are we? Let's see. Are we getting in towards the end of the 90s? Nate, I've got a note here that your dad met one of his greatest inspirations was Leon Theremin, but and he finally met him in 1989. So that would have been a buzz for him.
Yes. He met him at the Bourges Electronic Music Festival in France, in Bourges, France.
He would have been pretty old by that time, Leon. I mean, because he would have developed that instrument in the 30s.
Yeah, he was probably well into his 80s at that point.
Yeah.
If not 90.
Yeah.
I should know this.
Almost as old as you, Ben.
In any case, the whole reason that Dad was able to spend some really good quality time with him was there's a wonderful musicologist named Olivia Mattis who was writing an article for Keyboard Magazine about Leon Theremin.
Right.
And when Dad found out that that's why she was in Bourges to interview Leon Theremin, she told me he almost lost it. And he asked if he could, sit in on the interview and be part of the interview.
Right.
And she was gracious enough to allow him to do that. But, this, as you've noted, Leon Theremin was Bob's virtual mentor for his entire adult life. He was such an inspiration. So 1989 was definitely a thrill for him. And then he met him again in 1991 at Stanford's centennial celebration, where John Chowning gathered many electronic music luminaries, including Bob and Leon, and they were able to talk again then.
Yeah, awesome.
While we're talking about that, if I can just tell a quick story, I don't want to take up too much time, but this is a perfect time to tell it, and that is Bob wrote the foreword for Leon Theremin's biography, which is written by Albert Glinsky. And in that foreword is really beautiful, and I would encourage people to read it if they can. Or I actually, because I thought it was so powerful, I read it out loud and videoed it. We videotaped it, and it's up on YouTube, and you can hear it. But essentially, near the end, Bob talks about the fact that Clara Rockmore, who was a preeminent theremin virtuosa and was Leon Theremin's muse, she was also Russian, fantastically accomplished. She lived in New York City. Well, she had a theremin built by Leon Theremin, and it wasn't working. And she had a very talented tech named Michael Jason, and he was unable to repair it. So they asked Bob if he would come and help. So he went, and they were with Clara, and they gave it a go and repaired the theremin. And Clara played it and said, "It's still not right."
Right.
They tried again. And same result. She said, "It's still not right," and just a little perturbed. She was quite the perfectionist and had extremely high standards. And they went back again and worked on it again. And then she proceeded to play Gershwin's Summertime from beginning to end.
Wow.
And by the end, she had tears in her eyes. And she said, "I really never thought that I'd be able to play this instrument again."
Yeah.
And then Dad says in the foreword, "I consider that moment to be the highlight of my professional career when I had that spiritual connection to Leon Theremin."
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Which I just think is so powerful. Here's a guy who revolutionized the face of music, who's met I don't know how many rock stars, been to how many rock concerts, seen his instruments, open up the sonic landscape for people. But that moment when he connected with the person he considered to be his virtual mentor, by repairing one of his original instruments, that he considered to be the high point of his career.
Yeah, well, I mean, let's if we roll back to when did he start building those Theremins, Michelle? Or was he 12? 10, did you say 12, 14?
14.
14, 15, about 1949.
Yeah, look, you think about it, he's been building Theremins since 14, and he's met the guy, what was it now, who was 53? Oh boy, that's the 50s. And so 40 years later, 30, nearly 40 years later, he's met the guy that actually developed and designed the theremin. I mean, it'd be pretty surreal. And then to actually repair one of his instruments. Yeah, I could feel that. I know where your dad's coming from with that one. But, those virtuoso theremin players, Michelle, they just blow me away. I mean, there's just a level of musicality. You're going to have perfect pitch. You have to have perfect pitch. You have to have relative pitch. And then you have to have the dexterity of being able to hang your hands in midair, right? And just pull off those notes. With Clara, and there's another, I stumbled on Pamelia Kirsten. Is that how you pronounce her name?
Pamelia.
Pamelia,
and she goes by Stickney now. Yes.
Right, but absolutely unbelievable, right?
She's genius level.
Pete, if you haven't seen anything of that, so again, Pamelia, right? The way Pamelia, there's a video on there, and she's playing with a really complex. There's the piano and there's some other instrumentation and stuff, but very complex type of musicality stuff, and it sounds like a violin, right?
Right.
So you got to think, right? You're hanging your hands in midair, and you're playing along to a an equally tempered instrument, right? And so you've got to have the perfect pitch, you've got to have the relative pitch, and it's sounding like a violin with all of the trills and the runs. And I'm watching her hand movements going, seriously, I'm going to swear here, Michelle. I'm going, how the fuck is she doing that? That is just blowing me away, right? And then...
the spatial awareness is something else.
This is even better. Further on, there's a walk, there's like a jazz, it kind of turns into like this jazz thing, and there's this walking bass line happening. And I'm like, walking bass line? Where the fuck? And then I realized she was playing it, and that was another what the fuck moment, because I'm like, come on. There's a little short, I found another short video this morning, Pete, of the walking bass line.
Yep.
But it took me about 10 or 15 seconds to realize she was actually playing the walking bass line, Michelle. And at that point I went, okay, I've got to sit down here. Amazing, absolutely amazing. Because I've actually played, attempted to, I've been in front of the ether waves, and I was lucky enough to get in front of like even the big pro one, the big monster one.
Yep.
I couldn't make anything except for maybe woo-woo, sound effect UFO landing.
Star Trek sound effect, that's about it.
I couldn't do anything with it, amazing. Again, we got sidetracked, sorry.
They say it's the easiest instrument to play, but the hardest instrument to master.
Yeah, I can see that.
Well, it's easier to make a sound.
Yep.
Right.
But to make music out of it, you just got to be at another level. It's unbelievable. Yep. So, I tip my hat to anyone that can actually play that instrument. That's amazing. So we're kind of getting towards, we're into the 90s now. So through the 90s with Big Briar, your dad was mostly focused, like you said, he was doing the alternate controllers, but he was mostly focused on the Theremins, and what I called, Mooga Fuga pedals, but Moga Foga, that's the first, we were actually discussing that. Is it pronounced Moga Foga? You went, yep. I went, man, that's a first. Because I can tell you, I dropped that one-liner on a client this week, and he goes, the what? I went, Mooga Fuga. He goes, Vin, they're Mooga Fugas. I went, they're not, mate, they're Moga Fogas. He's going, come on. He thought I was kidding. And I went, all right, listen to the podcast. You're going to hear it directly from the horse's mouth, almost, right? So it's the Moga Fogas. So that's what he did through the 90s, because there was kind of like, not a black hole, but for me, through the 90s, I didn't really follow too much about what your dad was doing. He kind of not disappeared, but he'd fallen below my level of perception, put it that way, right? So it wasn't because I was focusing more on the computer and the music technologies that were evolving through the 90s, right? And then towards the end of the 90s, and then when I left my previous job, and I started out on my own, and I had a close friend that had gone out on his own like a year earlier, and he was your dad's distributor here in Australia, you see. So we were already across the Moga Foga pedals and the ether waves, right? And then when your dad regained the name, now when was that? Hang on, I'm looking at my timeline.
2002.
2002, he got his name back.
Which there's a whole lore behind that too, because he had to sue for it.
Yeah, I was about to say, can you actually just give us a little bit of an overview of that, or is that a really long overview, how he got his name back?
No, it's not too long.
Who actually owned the name? Who had the rights to the name at that point? Was that still Norland?
No, what happened is the company closed and the trademark for the name lapsed.
Right.
And that was not the kind of thing that Bob was paying attention to at that time.
And who snapped that up?
A guy named Don Martin in Ohio.
And he was like what? Just a corporate raider type of guy that was buying up trademarks or something, was he?
I actually don't know a lot about him, but he didn't just scoop up the trademark. What finally got Bob's attention was that he started manufacturing substandard MiniMoogs under the Moog name.
Oh, I think I remember some of this.
Right,
now.
and they're notoriously referred to as Donnie Moogs.
Right.
Yes. And that's what caught Bob's attention. Not that he was paying attention to the trademarks, but when someone started making crappy instruments with his name on them, that really bothered him, because he was a perfectionist and was devoted to the high craft of his work. So at that point, he decided to try to get the name back. Now, it's worth noting that at some point, it was either Norlin or the people who were in charge of Moog Music and knew it was going to go out of business offered him the name, and for $50,000,
Right.
and he decided against it. And just to tell you kind of how the level of humility that Dad had about himself, his company, his name, he went to a friend who recounted this to me many years later after Dad passed away. He went to a friend and he was talking to him about this possibility of getting his name back by paying, $50,000. And he said, I just need to ask you, do you think my name is worth anything?
Oh,
God.
I know. And then his friend says to me, Michelle, you'll have to forgive me. But I looked at, and these two were very good friends. He said, I looked at your dad and I said, Bob, are you stupid?
Well, yeah, you know what? And just leading into that story, which is really interesting, and I want to make this point, Michelle, right? And because I've read it numerous times in a couple of different articles about him, is that your dad only patented one thing, which was the ladder filter, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they've said that, the speculation is that if he could have become extremely wealthy if he had patented his other, the oscillators and the filters and he did patent the filter, but the
pitch wheel,
the envelope generators. If he'd actually patented those, one, he would have been he could have become extremely wealthy, but there probably would not have been a synthesizer industry because because it wouldn't have been as open and people would have been having to pay all of these licensing fees to use any type of component. The synthesizer industry probably would not have eventuated. Do you know what I mean? So it's So there's a level of humility where he's just gone, you know what? It's almost like open source back in the day. He's just said, okay, these are the innovations I've come up with. You can use them. And just leading on to that story, and this is a story that Dave Smith told myself and Pete during his podcast. He said that he walked into a store, saw the MiniMoog, had no idea what it was, touched the key and went, okay, I want one of these, took it home and literally took it apart. I don't know if you've heard this story, Michelle, right? Literally took the MiniMoog apart because he goes, I want to know how this thing works. Then I think he couldn't put it back together. So he rang I'm pretty sure he rang your dad or he rang Moog back at the time and asked for the schematics. And guess what? Your dad sent him the schematics. It's like, can you imagine that happening nowadays? Hey, listen.
The rest is Dave Smith history.
Yeah. But I don't know if you've heard that story before, but yeah, he literally bought a MiniMoog. I think he was about 16 or something at the time. Literally took it apart, right, and then couldn't reassemble it, and then went, oh, okay, I need some schematics, and then they sent him the schematics to get it working again. Am I remembering that correctly, Pete? I'm sure that
sounds about right. It's been a little bit since we did that one, though.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, Dave told me that the MiniMoog was his first synthesizer.
Yeah. Did you know the story that he actually took it apart and then couldn't put it back together and needed the schematics?
No, I did not. I did not know that, but that sounds very much like Dad. Dave Rossum,
yes,
who's also a very important innovator in the field of synthesis.
Yes.
He told me that when they were building modulars, that Dad actually wrote them and wanted one of their catalogs.
Yeah. So Dave Rossum is from Emulator, EMU Systems, yeah.
And Dave told me, he said we were all kind of really nervous because, we were basically taking your dad's work and, making our own evolution of that.
Mm.
And we were worried that he was going to be angry at us. So we sent him the catalog, and I think they might have included a note that said something like that. And he said, your dad wrote me this long letter back telling us, how much he admired the product we were making, but gave us some business advice and told us we weren't charging enough. And Dave said, you know what? We started charging a lot more, and he was right.
Yeah.
And that really helped the success of the company.
Yeah.
So, in a lot of instances, Dad was just more interested in the spirit of the whole process and not the bottom line.
Yeah. And look, all of those innovators at the time, we talk about 6 degrees of separation. There was probably like a half a degree of separation between all of those synth innovators around that kind of late 70s, early 80s, all throughout that time. And it's very interesting how all of those companies had very, very similar type of experiences where they literally all went broke in the 80s or even earlier, and
Yep.
yeah, very interesting. So just quickly to finish up with your dad's legacy. So he got the name back in 2002, and the last instrument that he worked on, which Pete owns, is the MiniMoog Voyager, and I still remember, the first one of those landing in Australia. I loved the thing. It was just amazing. I just thought, yeah, a MiniMoog for the age,
Mm-hmm.
Not only did it have all of the character of the original MiniMoog, had MIDI and, had patches, so we could, you didn't have to sit there and fly into the dials every time you wanted to change a sound.
The dual filters and everything. It was really good.
It was an amazing instrument. And, I've actually got one funny story. I don't know if I told you, Pete, but there was a limited edition MiniMoog Voyager that came out that had
not the gold one.
No. It had Perspex mod and pitch wheel, and there was like a blue. It was lit up blue, right?
Yep.
So one of the clients actually ordered one of these limited edition ones. It had a signature on it as well. I think they were signed. So there was some limited edition aspects to it. But when it arrived, it didn't have the pitch and mod wheel, and the client's going, "Hey, what's going on here? Where's me fluorescent?"
Like the wheels just were not in it at all.
No, they weren't in it at all.
Oh,
and so my friend at the time, who was the distributor, he's me emailed them back and said, "Hey, listen, this is a limited edition one. We haven't got the mod wheel and the pitch wheel assembly." They said, "No worries, we'll send one out." All right. So they sent it out. We fitted it. Guess who's still got the original one? That it's barely been used. Well, actually, it was a brand new instrument. Guess who's still got the original one?
Who?
Me. Me. It just got put aside, and we go, "Oh, we'll use that as a spare." Right? Well, we never used it. And I remember when I was we were packing up the premise, and we were moving to a new premise, and this thing ended up being thrown in the bin. I've gone, no, you give me that. So that's my little bit of my MiniMoog Voyager. That's the only piece.
MiniMoog Voyager, yeah.
MiniMoog Voyager, another $10. Oh, boy.
Yeah, and no editing those out either.
What's that? Sorry,
I say no editing those out.
No.
I've got a green backlit Voyager. It's sort of a weird color, but that's why the price was good when I bought it used at the time. And an RME, which is absolutely gorgeous, the rack mount version, which is
I've got a photo of holding one of those rack mount versions, right? Signed, and I'm standing next to Rick Wakeman when he was in Australia. So the rack. You got one of the rack mount ones as well.
Yeah. But I always lusted after, there was a really large one that came in like a Tolex wrap that had all the patch points on the front panel and all that stuff. Yeah, that was the one I really wanted, but it was just always out of reach.
And that was a 5-octave keyboard from memory.
Yeah, it was enormous. Gorgeous stuff.
Oh, that's the Voyager XL.
That's the one. Yeah.
I think it also had a ribbon or something on it, if I remember correctly, like
right across the front.
Maybe I'm misremembering. Yeah, or maybe I'm misremembering that. So, but it was a nice one.
Yeah, there you go. And so am I correct in saying that was the last instrument that your dad was hands-on designing?
Well, that and the Etherwave Pro.
Yes, the Etherwave Pro, but the last synthesizer was the Voyager, correct?
I thought he worked on the Fatties, no?
No. I mean, okay, in the most cursory way, only because Cyril Lance, who was a senior engineer at Moog Music, was hired in 2005 when my dad was very, very ill with his brain tumor.
Right.
So I think Cyril and Dad were only able to get together once. and talk either once or twice before he passed away. And they discussed this new synth. And Dad jotted down some basics on a napkin. And their discussions and that napkin were really all Cyril had to go on.
Right.
So Cyril is primarily responsible for the little fatty.
Okay.
Right. Yeah.
That makes sense.
But the design inspiration, do you have that napkin? You wouldn't have that napkin in the archives, would you, Michelle?
Well, I have never asked Cyril if he has it. I don't know that if he still has it or not. But
Yeah.
I'll have to ask. But no, we don't have it.
Right. So that brings us right up to pretty much where the following year, in 2006, you founded the Bob Moog Foundation.
Moog, yep.
Bob Moog Foundation, another $10. And boy, I'm going to be broke by the end of this show. So I think, why don't we move into that, Michelle? Now, I did have some points about, just real quickly. Well, I'm just going to ask you, your personal history growing up as the daughter of Bob Moog, right? Was there a point where you started to begin to realize that your father was more than just dad, and that he was someone that was so well known and revered within the music and artistic kind of industry and populace?
Well, there were times, a few times in my childhood, and I will say that they had to come from external sources because Dad would never talk about it, and Mom didn't really talk about it.
Right.
We all kind of knew the very basics. Dad invented the Moog synthesizer, and he was well known, but other than that, it was never really talked about in our family.
Yeah.
The first exposure I had to his fame was my mom sat us down to watch TV one night, which was odd because TV was strictly limited in our household to, we could watch the news and the Muppets and after school specials, and that was it.
Right.
Yep.
And she was sitting us down to watch a show called To Tell the Truth, which was an American game show, where you had three, you had a panel of judges, and then you had three people all claiming to be one semi-famous person.
Yep.
And the process was the panel would ask each of the contestants questions about who they supposedly were.
Right.
And based on how well they asked the questions at the end, the culmination was, there would be the person who got the most amount of votes, but then the announcer would say, "Will the real da-da-da please stand up?" And, maybe the panelists had guessed and maybe they hadn't. So this was the show, and Mom sat us down to watch it. And lo and behold, who was the show about? A guy named Bob Moog. And so they introduce everybody, and they introduce the three Bob Moogs, and there's Dad with two other people who are obviously not Bob Moog. But they all, when they all come on, they all say, "My name is Bob Moog. My name is Bob Moog.
Right.
My name is Bob Moog."
Yeah.
And then they go through this whole process of the questions. And that was really the first time sitting there watching my dad on TV.
Yeah.
That really means something, to a 5, I was 5 years old.
Yeah.
That Dad had a whole nother persona that I wasn't part of. And not that I was totally unaware, but I was only aware in a very surface-oriented way. And just to round out the story, at the end, one of the other contestants, if you will, one of the other Bob Moogs got all the votes.
Yes, right.
And Dad got none.
Right.
And so when the guy goes, "Will the real Bob Moog please stand up?" Dad pops up out of the desk, behind the desk, and and the panelists are all like laughing because they didn't guess him, and he was just thought it was hilarious.
Yeah.
That there he is and nobody guessed who he was. But that was the first time. And then I think after that, when I was in 9th grade, which would have been about 14 years old, at the very beginning of the year, one of the classes I was taking was physical science. And remember that we were in the South here in North Carolina. And where the teacher says, I want you to flip through your book. This is what we're going to be studying all year. And everyone's flipping through the book, and all of a sudden someone goes, well, there's Mimi's daddy. Mimi is my my family nickname.
Right.
Oh, nice.
And I can remember just getting beet red and thought, where? And so someone, says the page number, and I go there, and there's my dad's face staring back at me from my physical science book. And I just have this out of body experience. Like, what is going on here? Because quite honestly, this Bob Moog character was way in the distance.
Mm.
I tell people, I didn't know Bob Moog until I was 37 and he died.
Yeah.
Mm.
I knew my dad.
But you know what, Michelle? I think that's an amazing legacy to have, and a memory of your dad as well. Growing up as dad being dad,
Yeah.
You think of other children of people that have been famous. I bet you there'd be very minimal that would say, I didn't actually realize, dad was always just dad, right? And the other persona was something that, of course, it's very, very important, but it's not something that was imposed on us. That just shows the humility that your father had, to me, and life takes precedent, Michelle. I always say life takes precedent, and that to me, it just makes me respect your father even more, 100% more, that he actually was able to separate those two personas, and gave you guys a normal, family life. Yeah.
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
Except for baking electronics in the oven.
Except for baking electronics in the oven, yeah.
Well, and then there were other times like when Isao Tomita came to visit, or Eddie Harris came to visit, or the roadie from Toto came because they were in Charlotte at a concert and something was wrong with one of their Moog synthesizers. So they came all the way to Asheville, just the roadie, to the house on 89 acres of land in the middle of nowhere. This guy appears in his tight leather pants and his cool leather jacket and his like long shaggy hair. And then he and dad are sitting in the living room with dad with his Sears Roebuck faded jeans pulled up above his belly button and his, his chambray shirt with his pocket stuffed full of pens and pocket protector. It's times like that where you also think, okay, right. There's the thing again. The thing's happening right now. Oh, Chick Corea. I had dinner with Chick Corea. I had no idea who he was.
Yeah.
We didn't get any primers like, hey, listen, you guys, Chick Corea is coming. We got 6 of his albums. We're going to listen as a family. This is why he's important. Nothing. The guy just, and it's later. It's the kind of thing where I hardly remembered it, except for at that point, Chick was chain smoking. And I was amazed that my parents, he's the only person I remember that my parents allowed to smoke inside the house.
Yeah, Chick Corea privileges in your house, yeah.
Right. He just went from one cigarette to another at the time. I think he stopped doing that later. But so, yes, all of a sudden we would have like, these people over who of, great notoriety. And that's also what, kind of made you stop as a little kid and go,
Tomita is the reason I got into synthesis to begin with.
Yeah. There you go.
Like his Snowflakes Are Dancing and other albums like that. I didn't realize that you all had met with him.
Yeah. But you know what, Michelle? Those artists that came over to the house, they probably felt way more comfortable that you didn't know who they were. They would you just treat them as normal human beings.
You've just hit the nail on the head why also Dad didn't bring Bob Moog into the picture, because he just wanted to be known as Dad.
Right.
Yeah. But also sounds like, he's so relaxed around these people. I finally got to watch that documentary from 2004. And your dad's, giving the interview. But the best part for me, he's backstage with Rick Wakeman, and there's another artist, and I can't remember this. You're chuckling.
Bernie Worrell.
Yeah, you're chuckling because you know where I'm going with this. And Rick Wakeman's being Rick Wakeman, right? Mm-hmm. And he takes off and he tells this kind of there's a joke where there's a bit of innuendo going on, and I can see how embarrassed your dad was, and I'm just going, there's the real Bob, and Rick's taken off in his usual manner, right? And there's all this innuendo going on, and your dad's just sitting there going, is he actually really saying that? Yes.
Yes, and then he burst out laughing at the end,
right.
but it was somewhere between, appreciating the hilarity of it and also just being a little like, as you say, did he really just say that?
Did he actually just say that?
Yeah.
But also watching your dad's posture and face when Rick was giving him like these amazing compliments, and I just felt, I think, just to me, I think your dad was one of these people who probably wasn't good at taking compliments. Am I right? Or I just that's what I kind of picked up, that he was just, I'm Bob, this is what I do. And he didn't really feel overly comfortable with when Rick was giving him this really high praise. And he's like, oh, really? Okay. Yeah.
No, he was not comfortable with it. And I was, I witnessed that myself on more than one occasion.
Yep.
He did have a great deal of humility about him. I also think that there was a sense from him that he got a lot of attention, and a lot of people who did a lot of very important things did not get as much attention. And what followed from that was some resentment, which actually I've come up against myself in my job. Just realizing that there's that dynamic. But also my stepmother told me something really interesting once, and that is, she said, your dad was really disciplined about not thinking of himself in any kind of grandiose terms. She said, because he said to her, once you cross that mental barrier where you consider yourself be so much better than everybody else, you can never go back. And that was very important to him. He was definitely very inclusive, egalitarian type person, and wasn't interested in a lot of superiority. So part of it was just his personality, but part of it was a mental, intellectual commitment on his part.
Yeah. But that's his humility. That's where it just comes down to his amazing humility. And look, we could keep talking about your dad for another hour, but I know that we're a little bit time constrained. So I think what we should do, Michelle, is move on to your work with the Bob Moog Foundation, the genesis and the mission. What was your inspiration for creating the foundation, and how it is an independent, non-profit, donor-driven organization that has really no formal affiliations with Moog Music.
Moog Music.
Yeah, Moog Music. How many?
You're almost there, Vin. You almost made it there.
Because I read it. So I was reading it.
Yeah. one more time. Let's just do this one more time.
Moog Music Inc.
Go through and repeat what you just asked, though.
Moog Music. Oh, do I have to go through again? Okay. All right. Michelle, I think it probably right at this point, I think it'd be great if we move on to your work with the Bob Moog Foundation. Its genesis, what was the inspiration for creating the foundation, and how it is an independent, non-profit, donor-driven organization that has no formal affiliations with Moog Music Inc.
Okay.
And there's a pregnant pause now. See, I'm going to put crickets in there. Off you go, Michelle.
So the genesis of the foundation is actually very interesting. My father found out that he had a brain tumor in late April of 2005.
Right.
We were all hoping that he was going to beat it, but his decline became very pronounced by June and July. And he was eventually lost the use of the left side of his body because the tumor was in the motor center of his brain.
Right.
And it just kept growing and growing. And we were very protective about nobody knowing because the whole thing, as you might imagine, was terrifying and deeply saddening. And it was hard enough for him and his wife and the rest of the family to deal with what was happening and to just try to help him as much as we could. So we were keeping everything very hush-hush. But somewhere around the beginning of July, he said to my younger brother, Matthew, who is kind of the tech geek in the family, there's some people around the world I want to keep in touch with. How can I without writing emails, he certainly didn't want to talk on the phone. He was never a big phone guy anyhow, and especially with what was going on. He said, is there a way that everyone, just these 40 people can know, we can send them messages about what's going on? And my brother Matthew said, there's this site called the carryingbridge.com. And the carryingbridge.com is built for critically and terminally ill people to be able to communicate with people that they love, but in a way that is comfortable for them given their illness. And what a page on the carryingbridge.com consists of is it's divided into a journal where the person who is ill or someone who's taking care of them can journal out. And people can come and check on that journal every day. And they can talk about how they're doing and what their thoughts are and that kind of thing. And then the other main component is there's a guest book. And people can sign the guest book and just tell you, leave messages for the person who is struggling with their illness. And just say, I'm thinking about you. I love you. Here's a poem. I heard if you eat 2 cups of blueberries a day, it'll shrink your tumor. Just whatever the case may be. So my brother set up this page on the Carrying Bridge, sent the link to these 40 people. And one of them posted the link on a synthesizer chat group.
Oh.
And within a day, there were 1,000 hits on the page. And we all freaked out. And Matthew put up a password. And he wrote the 40 people again and said, here's the password. Don't share it. And then my dad surprised us a couple days later. He said, you know what? Just take the password down. Just let them come, is what he said. And we were really surprised. That was, I think that was July 7th. Between July 7th and August 20th, 60,000 people logged onto that page.
Yeah, amazing.
And then he passed away on August 21st. Another 20,000 people logged on that day. But for me, even more poignant than the number of people who went to that page. And remember, this is 2005. It's, the internet wasn't quite at the stage where it is now. Were the amount of people who, quote unquote, signed the guest book. There were about 4,000 people who didn't just sign the guest book. They left testimonials about how Bob Moog had changed and in some cases completely transformed their lives. And we would get feedback like, because of Bob Moog, I'm a musician. Bob Moog gave me my creative voice. Because of Bob Moog, I'm an engineer. My life would not be the same without Bob Moog. This went on and on and on. And what would happen is I would go help take care of him after my day job. I'd go take care of him. I'd come home, have dinner with my family, put my kids to bed. And then I would go and I would read those testimonials. And as someone who grew up with my dad and did not really understand the impact that Bob Moog had, this was a dawning for me. I would sit in front of my computer and read these testimonials and I would just cry.
Right.
I would just cry the whole time. I mean, this is what my dad was holding back from us.
Yeah.
And all of us were just astounded, all of us meaning the family. And when Dad did pass away, we decided, you know what, this is really important. This kind of inspiration that Dad unwittingly cultivated over the 50 years that he dedicated himself to this industry, this deserves to be carried forward. I mean, this is something very rare and important to carry forward to the next generation. So we decided to create a foundation. Now, mind you, none of us had any idea of what we were getting into. My brother did set up some basic structure. A few people donated at the very beginning, but this is not something my dad would have ever envisioned. He certainly didn't have any money for it. We started with essentially no money. We weren't even a foundation. We were a fund within a bigger umbrella organization. And my brother was going to run the foundation because it was he was kind of the catalyst for it. But after a month, for various reasons, he said, I don't want to do this anymore. And so he came to the family and said, I don't want to do this. Someone else needs to step forward. And I thought, oh, well, I'll step forward, but I'm sure everyone's going to want to run it. And I was completely surprised because none of my siblings nor my stepmother wanted to step forward at all. So I'm like, I'll do it. I was a small business owner and I had 2 little kids. But I said, I'll do it. also not knowing exactly what I was getting into, but just knowing how important it was. It was not something that we could just let go. And from that moment, I've basically, devoted every waking moment of my professional career to turning the Bob Moog Foundation into something that is a real reflection of his stunning legacy. So, I just have to point out here that I personally and the foundation itself owe so much to those 4,000 people who taught us what Bob Moog meant to the rest of the world. I should also note those 4,000 people came from 67 different countries.
Yeah, amazing.
And that was really the genesis of the foundation. And then as a family, we got together and we had to decide everything. What's going to be the name of the foundation? What's going to be the focus of it? I mean, it may sound odd now, but there were family members who wanted it to be a foundation about brain cancer. There was another element of the family that wanted it to be about civil rights because Dad was huge on civil rights. And I was the one who had to step in and say, you know what, those are such worthy causes. But if we're really going to translate Dad's legacy into something powerful that inspires the next generation, I think it should probably be about electronic music.
Yep. Yeah.
So that's what happened. And I worked for a year as a volunteer, just kind of getting my bearings and reaching out to different people in our community for help, starting to build some kind of little tiny financial base. And after a year, in early 2007, I went to my stepmother and I said, we are not doing this foundation justice with me working on it 2 hours a night or 3 hours a night after work. And the reason I said that is because I went to my first NAMM in January of 2007. And the outpouring there of support for the Bob Moog Foundation was incredible. And I just realized we're not doing it justice. So at that point, she said to me, well, you can go full time if you can raise your own salary.
Right.
So somehow I managed to do that. It wasn't very much. I started off making $35,000 a year. But we made it work. And we eventually came to these 3 projects that the foundation now focuses on. And just to back up a little bit, you asked about our mission. And the mission is to inspire people of all walks of life through the intersection of science, music, technology, and innovation.
Nice.
So it's essentially a mirror image of Bob Moog's career itself.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that we do that now is through 3 projects. The first is our Hallmark educational project, Dr. Bob Sound School, through which we teach second graders, these are 7-year-olds,
right,
about the science of sound through music and technology. So a lot of people get a little confused and think we are music educators. We're not. We're science educators.
Right.
So we teach science through music. And we do this by training teachers in 2 school districts in our area. And then they teach the kids over a 10-week period. So this is a very thorough curriculum that meets state and national standards, but is highly experiential and multisensory.
Yeah, and the kids would love it, Michelle, wouldn't
they? They do love it. They do love it. We have taught over 40,000 kids in our area.
There you go.
And we are just on the precipice of growing this program nationwide. That's something we've been trying to do for years. There are things that have, been challenges for us, but we are about to surmount those challenges. And in the next 12 to 18 months, I think, you will see us branching out outside our local area.
Yeah.
Nice.
So those kids, they've got their hands on with the Theremins and the synthesizers and stuff.
We don't bring synthesizers into the schools because they are complex, and you have to remember that second grade teachers are generalists.
Right. Okay.
So who also have their hands full, and every minute of their day is allotted to meeting one standard or another.
Right.
Welcome to American public education.
So it's no different here.
So, and also for the kids, I mean, in the amount of time that we have, it would be hard to fit in the principles of synthesis. It's more important for us. Our whole goal here is that kids actually have access to very sophisticated synthesizers at their fingertips every day through their iPhone, through their iPad.
Right.
And they can make all kinds of fun sounds and not understand one bit about what they're doing.
Right.
what the foundations of all of that they're able to access so easily is. So that's what we're trying to do, is give kids a really strong foundation about the basic physics of sound. So we do bring the theremin in and the theremin, we use the theremin to teach kids about pitch and volume.
Yeah.
And you can imagine that's one of our most popular lessons. The kids just absolutely love it.
Yep.
And but we don't bring in synthesizers at that age. We are hoping to develop another curriculum for the 5th or 6th grade, and at that point we will start bringing in synthesis into the lessons.
For some reason, I thought that the kids came to you. So you're actually going into the schools.
Well, we go into the schools through the teachers.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
The Bob Moog Foundation actually has quite a small staff, and we don't have the capacity to be the ones to go into the schools.
Right. So you're training the teachers up.
Yes. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Exactly. So, I mean, you may have that perception because we will go into the schools and visit the classrooms while they're in the middle of the curriculum, and we take lots of pictures and talk to them about it. And you may have seen those pictures with me or somewhere else from the foundation in the classroom, but we're really just visiting.
Right. Okay. Gotcha.
So that's the sound school then, right?
That's a sound school. So then the second project is the Bob Moog Foundation Archives, which is a huge repository of historical material. It used to be about 10,000 items large. And just recently, we had a huge donation. I can't say from who yet because it's not public, but it probably will be in the next few months, of over 5,000 items. So the Bob Moog Foundation Archives is now about 15,000 historical items that has mostly been donated to us by people all over the world, and includes everything from schematics and vintage catalogs, desktop notebooks, to photographs and correspondence, and the list just kind of goes on and on. At this point, it is truly a world-class collection that we protect and preserve and steward so that journalists and researchers can come and access the material, in addition to us sharing some of the material with museums, which brings me to our third project, which is...
Before you go into the museum, I was curious, do you have any favorite items in the archives? Like personal favorites?
Yes. I mean, there's a lot that is so remarkable, but if I had to just pick a handful, I would say there are letters from Wendy Carlos to Bob.
Yeah.
We have not only a Model 201 theremin, which was Bob's first theremin from 1953, which we actually acquired, which means we purchased it, but we purchased it for a really low price. But just recently, someone donated a Model 351 theremin, which was the next iteration. These theremins are really incredibly rare. There are only 10 or 15 of each in existence. In addition, we are very, very honored to have Herb Deutsch's theremin, his Melodia theremin, the instrument that connected him to Bob back in 1963. It is currently in the Moogseum. We also have Herb's MiniMoog, which was given to him by Bob. So, of course, there are many, we also have the first Voyager ever sold, which was sold to our board chair, and he donated that Voyager to us. Yes, and we also have a couple of Moog Modulars, one that's on permanent loan and one that is, that we also purchased, but at a much reduced rate, which is from 1967. So those are just a few of my favorites. There's just the documentation, though, is just astounding, and there's just an incredible amount of information in the Bob Moog Foundation archives.
It sounds like a fantastic collection of stuff. It sounds like the kind of thing I would love to go and sit down and spend a couple of days just pouring through.
Yes, you would, and you would need that.
Yeah, have you digitized a lot of the the documentation? Because I mean, it'd be a lot of it would be pretty fragile, and at this point, wouldn't it, Michelle? Or so, can people actually access the actual documents, or just the digital versions of them?
It's both, and we have digitized a lot of it, but not all of it. I mean, that's a lot of work, takes a lot of time, and some of it is not easily scannable.
Yeah, because it's so large. Some of those schematics will be massive.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think we are currently executing a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities, and we are working on a few different collections within the archives. But I think our next grant cycle, we will be asking for one of those, the funding for one of those scanners, which is in the many, many thousands of dollars. That will help us digitize things like the schematics. We have probably about 3,000 schematics in the archives.
Oh,
wow.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. So then that leads us into our own museum, the Moogseum.
Mm-hmm.
And the Moogseum is really kind of like a convergence of our educational project and our archival preservation project. The Moogseum is located downtown. It's a public facility where people can come and be inspired by Bob Moog's life and career. And not only by Bob Moog, but the people that he worked with and who were his contemporaries. We have a host of interactive custom exhibits that you won't find anywhere else in the world. And that allows the visitor to delve into Bob Moog's life. It allows them to delve into 35 different innovations in synthesis, ranging from 1898 to 1995. We have an exhibit that explains to people how electricity turns into sound when it's traveling through a circuit board. Our newest exhibit is called Patching Sound, which allows people to patch their own modular synthesizer in a way that's very accessible. We have a recreation of Bob's workbench with many fascinating artifacts. And of course, there's a whole exhibit dedicated to Leon Theremin and 2 Theremins that people can play and learn much more about the Theremin. So we've had almost 45,000 people come through the Moogseum since it opened in 2019.
Yeah, that's awesome. So those displays, they're permanent displays, Michelle, or do you shuffle stuff around?
We haven't shuffled stuff around yet. Not very much, with the exception of adding the Patching Sound exhibit, which we added a whole nother kind of small room in the back of the Moogseum. We do add things in and out of the Bob workbench area, so that changes. Otherwise, things are more or less fixed. Part of the reason for that is 94% of our visitorship is from outside of Asheville.
Yeah.
So these are people who are just visiting and coming once.
Yep, of course.
It's also a funding question for us and just a size question because the Moogseum is on the small side. We are planning on expanding the Moogseum, hopefully in the next 2, 3, 4 years. And when we have more space, there will be more room to have more temporary exhibits that change out every, 3 to 6 months.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. But so you'll have a combination of permanent displays and bring in, some temporary displays as well.
Yes.
Yeah. That's awesome. So on my list here, Michelle, we've got some of the Bob Moog Foundation software partnerships. So you've got some partnerships listed here with some of the
Yeah. It would be great to talk about those.
Yeah. So on the one list, what have I got here? I've got the Spectrasonics Bob Moog.
Let's talk about that first.
Yeah. Okay. Go.
So we have been very fortunate to gain the support of many companies within the music technology industry. And the first among those is Spectrasonics.
Yeah, with Eric Persing. Yeah.
Eric Persing, who is just a saint of a human being.
Mm-hmm.
And we were very lucky and incredibly honored that he agreed to create a product that would benefit us.
Right.
And we had an idea of what that could be, and we went to him with that idea. And Eric Persing, being Eric Persing, took that idea and made it about, I don't know, 1,000 times better.
Yeah.
And he and his company came up with the Bob Moog Tribute Library, which was launched in March of 2011.
Right.
And the Bob Moog, there's a version 2 out at this point. So the current version has about over 1,300 sounds by over 50 different artists.
Yeah.
And it's this incredibly beautiful, powerful sound library. It's only functions with Omnisphere.
That's right. Yeah.
And it's $100. And that $100 goes completely to the Bob Moog Foundation.
Awesome.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Yes, 100%. And I will say that sound library has been so powerful, especially in years when we were really still getting our sea legs as a foundation and growing and trying to figure out how to develop an organization that would be sustainable. That I'm not sure that we would have made it this far without Spectrasonics.
Yeah.
That's how powerful that funding has been.
Amazing.
And it continues to be. It's we still get a healthy donation every single month from Spectrasonics, which we're incredibly grateful for. And there's a whole worldwide community able to enjoy all of these sounds made by Hans Zimmer and Vince Clarke and Michael Boddicker and Eric Norlander and CJ Vanston, and the list just goes on and on. Just really incredible participation. So that's one of the companies that has developed a product to support us. Native Instruments also has a product called Modular Icons.
Right. Yes.
That we actually worked on developing that with them. And by developing that with them, I should be careful because we certainly don't have the technical know-how of how to develop a sound library, but we helped connect them to a bunch of different people who owned a bunch of different modulars, not just Moog modulars, but many different kind of modulars were sampled for that.
Right.
And I actually traveled with a preeminent sound designer, Francis Prev, who used to write for Keyboard Magazine,
Right.
up to the National Music Center in Canada, and we sampled Tonto.
Oh, wow.
Yes, for modular icons. So for any of your listeners who use Contact, please look up modular icons because it's an incredible library itself. We also helped develop a small library with Motu, the Bob Moog Encore Sound Bank.
Yep.
And we are working on 2 others that I can't really talk about yet.
A little bit too early. Yep.
Yeah, there will be more. And we're just really very grateful at the support of the industry. We could not do what we're doing without that kind of support from the industry and from other donors.
Yeah.
Those are fantastic partnerships that you don't always see that these days. So it's really heartening to see that kind of partnership with you all.
Yeah, no, that's awesome, especially with Eric, because, Omnisphere is just, it's just massive. And Eric's history and legacy with all of the stuff that he did with Roland as well. He's a legendary patch programmer. He's one on my bucket list, Michelle, and I've got my fingers crossed that one day I can actually maybe corner him to come on the show as well. Now, just real quickly, because I know, again, we're looking at the time constraints, foundation culture and philosophy, we've probably covered a whole stack of it already, but you've got a board of directors, and I see Marcus Royal is one of your board of directors now.
Yes, he's the vice president.
Yes, amazing. And he was one of our guests on the show, an amazing human being, an amazing show. And if anyone hasn't listened to the Marcus Royal show, please go listen to that. And if you don't know the history, then you'd be surprised just how many pies Marcus has had his fingers in. Is probably the best way for me to actually describe Marcus's career. So there's definitely some very well-known names in not only your board of directors, but also you've got a board of advisors, partners, and then you've got a donor, and you've got membership levels as well. So, I mean, you've got all of these structures that have been set up within the foundation itself. Do you want to just quickly cover some of those?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, as a independent nonprofit,
yep,
which you mentioned before, and I'm glad you mentioned that. And yep. the reason it's important, just to reiterate that, is to impress upon people that we are independent from Moog Music.
Yep.
We do enjoy a supportive relationship with them, especially in the last year and a half.
Yeah.
Since they were bought by InMusic.
Yes.
Which has been a wonderful partnership, but we are completely independent, and we're not part of the company. And it's very important for people to understand that.
Yeah. And that was something that, you know, again, it's like from just the self-awareness, from an awareness point, I always made the assumption that there was a direct connectivity until I looked into it further, and then I went, right, no, you guys are completely independent. And it was Marcus that actually made that point, because I congratulated him in an email when he became appointed to the board. And I've gone, it'd be great working with, you know, Moog, great legacy. He goes, oh, no, we're completely independent. I went, oh, okay. So, and then the penny dropped, Michelle, you know, and so it is a point that we do need to keep repeating. But I'm very happy to hear that there has been a connection. With the new owners. Is that a nice way to kind of put that? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. There's been a wonderful connection with the new owners.
Awesome.
Yes.
Right.
So
you've got the board of advisors as well, and there's a lot of very familiar names on that one.
Yeah. So the board of directors is kind of the more formal board that is actually fiscally responsible for the foundation.
Yep.
And they are responsible for governing the foundation.
Mm-hmm.
And we're very lucky to have some very supportive, incredibly smart, experienced, and creative people on that board.
Mm-hmm.
That board is, it varies, but it's, somewhere around 10 people. The board of advisors is a little bit less formal, but it's a group of people a group of supporters who we go to tap into their expertise on a little bit more of an ad hoc, informal basis.
Right.
Which is really wonderful, because there are people who have been in the industry for decades. There are people from outside of the industry, people with all kinds of different perspectives. But they all are very supportive of our work and help, enrich not only our projects, but our understanding of how we can forge a meaningful path forward.
Yep.
And then as far as donors, we would not be where we are without our donors. We are completely donor driven. And there are several ways that people can help. Of course, making a financial donation is always the most direct line to helping to empower our work.
Mm-hmm.
I like to remind people that, funding for a nonprofit is like gas for a car.
Yeah,
right.
This is what makes the car go.
Mm-hmm.
And without it, the car doesn't go. So, of course, donations are a wonderful way to support the foundation, but we also have other ways, such as we have a membership program.
Yep.
And as you both have alluded to, we have these wonderful fundraising raffles that we run now 4 times a year. And I will say, since you mentioned Marcus, that he is heavily involved in the next raffle. And that is all I can say.
Right.
The next raffle launches in about a month. So You'll see what I mean when we launch.
Keep an eye out for that one. Yep.
And we also have an online store that has hundreds of items on it at this point, actually, which is also another important source of funding for us. And it's a really kind of fun way for people to support us. So between the memberships, donations, the online store, We have a special program called the Captains of Industry for people who pledge $5,000 a year for 3 years. So we really try to create ways to support us that people will find accessible and compelling. And all of that while inspiring them through the 3 projects that we're carrying forward.
Sure. And look, and the work that you've done, Michelle, has been incredible. And I'm hoping that it just, onwards and upwards. You were saying that you wanted to get a larger space for the museum. And if the archives, you've just been, the archives actually expanded as well. So you need to put, you need to find some space to display
we do.
some of that stuff.
Right. So that's all pending funding. So
yeah.
There is one entity that is interested in helping support us to create a larger Moogseum, and we'll work on that. We were kind of headed in that direction, and then the hurricane hit.
Yeah.
Right.
Hurricane Helene. And so we've just taken a little bit of a step back to allow us to regroup, allow our community to regroup. But we will resume that process sometime soon.
Yeah.
Seems like a good time to mention that if folks don't already know, it's moogfoundation.org is where you go for the donations, and also where you have all the information for learning about the Moogseum, et cetera.
Yes, and people can also follow us on Facebook, on Instagram, on Blue Sky.
Yeah, I'll put the link up. I'll put a few links up on the podcast description as well. So we've got one last question. And Pete, would you like to ask that? Have you got your run sheet in front of you? Or?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Because that was the question that you come up with. Sorry, so can you do that one? Yep.
I know we've got like a minute here, but
yep.
Michelle, really, this was a question for you about if there's one thing that you want the public or the community to take away from your father's legacy or from the Moog Foundation, your choice here, kind of what is that thing?
I think the one thing that we'd like people to take with them is to think more creatively and expansively about the world around them, to embrace the process of discovery, and to embrace their ideas, to test them, and to not give up.
That's beautiful, Michelle.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was awesome.
That is certainly what Bob Moog left with us.
Absolutely inspirational, and thank you for that, Michelle. Now, I think we're going to need to kind of just round this up now. So I'd firstly like to thank you, Michelle, for your time and energy today. That's been
yes, thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you again, Pete, for being my co-pilot. And I'll count up how many times I mispronounced, and I'll make that donation to the Moog Foundation, the Bob Moog Foundation. Michelle, that's a promise. I'm going to count up. Hopefully, it doesn't send me broke. And every time I mispronounced it, I'll make that as a donation.
Well, save it for some raffle tickets, because that way, at least maybe you'll be in the run.
Okay.
But I will just say, Vin, that I have to explain to people so many times that it's Moog, and Moog rhymes with Vogue.
Yeah.
That our assistant director, Craig Festacci, after being on staff for 6 months, he got me a present. And that is, one of those nameplates for your desk.
Yeah.
You see for the executive, like the wood triangle with the brass plate on it, that says Michelle Moog-Koussa, executive director, or whatever. Well, mine just says Rymes with Vogue.
Oh, that's perfect. I reckon we can end it on that one. Yep. All right, guys, thanks again to both of you. I think with that, on to the next.